Anna West, founder of Sleep to Perform, works with leading sports teams and businesses across Europe. She helps individuals and groups to peak by understanding their sleep patterns, its correlation to circadian rhythm, stress levels, and lifestyle choices so they can become better sleepers. She's not interested in a quick fix, but long-lasting results, and provides a toolkit which you can utilize immediately for better sleep.
So I'd rather speak about the quality that we should embed into our sleep, which comes from a lot of good routines that people tend to forget. So it's about understanding your own pattern and how that pattern is actually leading or minimizing opportunity to optimize but not create optimal, because sleep very often doesn't allow optimal.
What is the one thing that you've learnt more than anything else in all the years you've been assessing various different elite people in their worlds where sleep's concerned? Anna, this is precisely the right time for me to be having this conversation with you. I'm off the back of back-to-back weekend nights where the children didn't sleep, and therefore neither did I. Talk to me about why sleep is so important to all of us. It seems like a really elementary question, but there must be a lot of stuff that you can put behind that.
I mean, you just said it. When we don't sleep, we feel like we function less optimal. So in that sense, sleep is a foundation of well-being. Sleep is a foundation of us being able to deliver the performance we want to. And I think in general, what you can say is that sleep is the precondition for life in many senses. But that being said, it's also important to underline that we can do quite well without longer periods of poor sleep, or with periods of poor sleep.
So can you tell me about the best version of a sleep cycle, what that should look like? What is an optimal sleep cycle supposed to look like for those of us who all crave it?
Well, many people crave it, so you're not the only one. And statistically, we know today that a lot of people aren't getting sufficient hours of sleep, and the quality of the sleep that they're getting is actually quite low as well. I tend to not talk about optimal because there's a quite high degree of creating sleep anxiety if we always try to strive for something which is not reachable. And life very often comes in the way of optimal sleep. So if we look at the World Health Organization, they would recommend that a healthy adult sleeps between 7 to 9 hours per night, uninterrupted sleep. And when was the last time you did that?
About 1999.
Exactly. So when I speak about sleep, and look, of course, we need to preach what we know science has concluded, but we also sometimes need to translate the science into the reality that people are living in. So I try to tend not to talk too much about the duration of the sleep. Not that it's not important, but sometimes it's not possible for us to get the duration that we should have. So I'd rather speak about the quality that we should embed into our sleep, which comes from a lot of good routines that people tend to forget. Remember that theoretically we're born to sleep, and then we do everything in our power to mess up that opportunity for the body as soon as we get out of bed. So of course, optimal sleep would be you sleeping between these 7 to 9 hours uninterrupted every night, which means that you can't have children, you can't have a busy life, you can't travel, you can't do exercise, So I'd much rather speak about what habits that leads to the optimized opportunity of getting the higher sleep output.
Okay, let's do exactly that then. So what are those habits, and how can we achieve that part?
I usually say that a good night's sleep starts when you wake up in the morning, right? So in theory, you prepare the body throughout the whole day to use that sleep window that you want to utilize during the night. And a good example is that the better we exploit daylight, the better that we actually accept that we are still working as cave women and cave men that has a circadian rhythm inside our body, which is responding to light. The better we will create the opportunity. Like, no human being was born to stay the whole day inside an artificial light. So a good way to start creating a positive sleep opportunity is actually to get up in the morning, make sure you get outside, get some proper daylight, make sure you not exercise, but that you move the body. If you take the picture of a caveman or a cave woman, we didn't just like wake up, fall out of bed, like accidentally fell into the fridge where we had like, or the water tap where we had like, we actually had to do a little bit of an exercise to get those things covered for us, which meant that we had to go out of a dark cave into the light. We had to walk to get the food. We had to walk to get the water. So if we apply some of that basic knowledge, to be honest, around how we actually live, I usually say like, get a dog. Like in today's like society, just get a dog, because it forces you to go, I have a dog. So it forces you to get up in the morning, get outside, get some of that like low level exercise, and then natural daylight as well. So a good place to start is to actually make sure that you follow the light of the day.
Good box tick for me because I've got 2 dogs, but I know exactly what you mean about that. A morning walk with both of those dogs sets me up really, really well for the day. And I think it's not just because I know that I've done a job. It is because, like you've said, I'm out in the fresh air, taking in the light, absorbing that. And it definitely has this energizing effect on you for sure. Why do you think we don't prioritize? Go on, you say.
No, it was just going back to your point. I think it's also because you give yourself the mental space to actually allow the day to start a little bit slower, if that makes sense. So today when we wake up, we're exposed to this tsunami of information from our phones, from all the different social media platforms that we attach to, from the news, et cetera, et cetera. And quite often, if we do an old-fashioned walk, we actually allow the system to wake up at a lower pace, which is also a more comfortable way for the body to actually wake up in the morning. So rather than us, it's a little bit like compared to a pulse, like it's much nicer for a pulse to increase gradually than go from 0 to 100. And in that sense, you're waking up the body in a more natural way, which is the way that the body was actually built to be woken up.
Why don't we prioritize sleep more? I mean, it's everywhere telling us, people, like you and lots of very learned people saying, come on, sleep really matters. It can make you do extraordinary things. Why is it that it's such an aside with so many of us, and we don't put it as a fundamental of everyday life that can change the goalposts? It can shift stuff, a good night's sleep.
I actually understand why people don't prioritize it, because ultimately we in theory do nothing when we sleep, right? And in a fast-paced world where we need to tick off a lot of boxes, in a way sleep can also be linked to laziness, right? Today, and it's changing definitely, but if you go back in time, you were a little bit of a warrior if you could claim that you could survive on 5 hours of sleep per night, that, everyone has heard about that neighbor or that grandpa who could always survive on 5 hours of sleep. Today, we know that we can't, that the body's simply not built to function like that. We can do that in periods of time, and then ultimately we will have to pay a price for it. Today, we don't prioritize it, I think, for 2 reasons, because the world is not built around sleep. The world today is built around being awake. But I do see that there's a shift in the perception of what sleep does, because it's also more and more accepted that breaks lead to productivity. So it's also quite environmental. It depends on where you are. If you look, I do some quite interesting projects in very like hardcore environments, both performance wise and like sports wise, but also like corporate performance wise. And if the perception of us being able to deliver high results is dependent on undermining sleep as much as possible, we have a clash, right? But if we are in environments where we actually understand that the sleep becomes a precondition for us to enhance performance, suddenly sleep is a part of our performance enhancement strategy. And sometimes in elite sports, it's a little bit more eatable, because we know that there's a strong link between poor sleep and increase of, or the risk of injuries. We know that there's a quite high link between demotivation, poor sleep, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit more measurable when we are working with sleep in elite sports environment as opposed to in corporate environments. And the big difference is also when you are a sports person, everything you do become a part of the asset that you are. Whereas in a private corporate setting, sleep is something that you do in your private domain, and you're not necessarily an asset to the organization.
I think that's brilliantly surmised, because when I look at my husband, and I think there are so many learnings you can take. He's an elite sports person, and I think the amount of learnings you can take from him and his world into the wider world, and like you say, a corporate or a business world, are extraordinary. But one of them fundamentally is the basics of sleep, which can, in sport terms, become this huge marginal gain, as you've just described. I completely understand where you're coming from when you say that. You've worked with a number of elite sports teams, and I know you have this sort of traffic light system when you assess them. Just tell me a bit about that and how that works.
So basically today you can screen people in a quite big array of ways to determine whether or not the sleep output is positive. So when I start to work with anyone, whether it's an elite sports person or someone in a high level corporate organization, I put them into a traffic light, not necessarily to determine if they don't have an opportunity, but to determine a little bit more where are they in regards to that opportunity. So let's say a football player who has a very low duration of sleep, very poor quality of sleep. It becomes a little bit of a business case as well, because if we have that factored into his performance regime, we also know that there's a higher risk of a burnout, of injury, etc. So it needs to be something that we apply to treat, if that makes sense. But if I have a green profile who's actually doing quite well, who needs a little bit of nudging or hacking here and there, it becomes an opportunity to harvest margins, like you said before. And the traffic light system allows me, or the screening that I'm doing allows me to basically put them into a box from where we can create the intervention, which will then squeeze margins or actually save him from very poor sleep, which is then putting him into a risk zone.
I suppose when it comes to green, you can always improve, can't you? Even if you're a green on the traffic light system, according to Anna West, you can always be better than that.
But the thing is, I try really not to preach in my mythology. I actually try to embrace the factual truth that very often elite sports and sleep does not go hand in hand. Like take Premier League football or Champions League football, where I'm working the majority of my time. We will have late kickoff times where we will have the most viewers, which means that it goes completely against normal sleep physiology or human physiology, because we don't want a big light exposure when we are going to sleep. We don't want caffeine. We don't want the adrenaline running in our system. So a football player is doing everything in his power to work against sleep. And then at the same time, we're telling him that he needs to sleep to avoid injuries. So I actually have a quite big responsibility in preaching the right knowledge, so that I also don't breed like sleep anxiety, because a lot of people like from my field came into sports and then we started speaking about, if we don't sleep, we'll see injured players, which means that we're actually breeding, or we're actually creating a potential problem so that they can't fall asleep, because they start to fear the fact that they can't really sleep and they need the sleep. So that was why I said I never preach optimal. I preach around how we can optimize, which I think is extremely important, because sleep is extremely multidisciplinary as well. And it's dependent on a lot of factors. As I said before, a good night's sleep starts when you wake up in the morning, which means that a lot of the strategies that will be applied around an athlete or a corporate person throughout the day, a lot of the choices that he or she will make will ultimately create the opportunity for sleep at night. And a good example would be a corporate guy who sits in front of his laptop the whole day. He doesn't move, he doesn't get outside. So already there, we're minimizing the opportunity for sleep. But at the same time, you might have an athlete who's like extremely active outside the whole day, but he doesn't have a break where the adrenaline and the cortisol level can drop down. So he will spike and he'll be quite stressed before he goes to bed. He also doesn't create necessarily a good sleep opportunity for himself. So it's about understanding your own pattern and how that pattern is actually leading or minimizing opportunity to optimize, but not create optimal, because sleep very often doesn't allow optimal.
So I've looked at what the key with one or two or many of these. Perhaps diet, first of
Absolutely.
all. How crucial is it to do the right thing by your body, by your system, thinking of the circadian rhythm as well ahead of going to sleep?
So I very often get the question about sleep nutrition, right? What should I eat before I go to bed to optimize my opportunity to sleep? And I say, look, it's not what you eat right before you go to bed that creates the opportunity, because you could eat like junk food throughout the whole day, but then you eat the right nutrients just before you go to bed, and then you didn't really create the opportunity. So for me, sleep and nutrition go very, very much hand in hand when you apply an all-round nutritional plan around yourself, meaning that if you don't eat for a longer period of time and then you all of a sudden eat something because you're craving food, your blood sugar levels are going to spike, which means that you're producing a lot more stress hormone. The challenge about that is then you have a higher level of stress hormone, and then the body can't really produce melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, when you have to go to bed. On the other hand, if you have a leveled nutrition and you have control about these blood sugar levels throughout the day, you leave an opportunity for the body to produce sufficient melatonin, which is the hormone which makes you fall asleep and stay asleep. So it goes hand in hand. And there will be, look, to be honest, research around nutrition and sleep is very multifaceted, and there's a lot of belief in XYZ components that you can put in, but it's also very blurry, to be honest. And especially in elite sports, because there will be things where we know that it can promote sleep, but then let's say you're a football player on match day -1, where you need to load carbohydrate because you're going into competition the next day after. In an ideal world, you would have loaded protein, but because we need to think about the match situation, we're actually going against. So sometimes it's a little bit individual where we can harvest. But what I would say is that nutrition and sleep are very interlinked, but it's not what you eat just before you go to bed. A good example, which is a little bit linked to it, is as well, is that hydration plays a massive role in our ability to sleep. The thing is just that we don't want people to overhydrate in the evening, because then ultimately they have to go to the toilet 2, 3, 4 times during the night, and then they break their own sleep cycle. So if you focus only on being hydrated, but you forget the mechanism about hydration and having to go to the toilet, it's a lose-lose situation. So a good example, so if you're not hydrated well enough, and here's a hack for everyone listening in, the thing is, again, your pulse level will rise and your blood pressure will rise, which will then make it more difficult for the body to create enough or sufficient melatonin. So a sleep hack is actually to make sure that you hydrate well enough throughout the day, leading to the sleep opportunity at night.
That makes perfect sense. We all just have to put it into practice. Now, alcohol is a funny one, because how many times have you heard people say, oh, I sleep so much better after a glass or 2 of wine? That is, I suspect, a commonly held myth, and not at all true. I mean, I know just from wearing one of these, I'm showing you my Oura ring at the minute. Whenever I look at my Oura ring after I've had a couple of glasses of wine at a very nice dinner somewhere or whatever, and not strictly behave myself where alcohol's concerned, my HPV scores are crazily bad. I mean, is that a common problem?
And your resting heart rate goes up. The thing is that we can all relate. Look, I'm not a saint here. I drink alcohol as well. I just do it purposeful, if that makes sense. So I know when to drink it, and I know when not to drink it, because I understand the mechanism behind it. The thing is about alcohol, I would say that it's most likely the most misunderstood sleeping drug on the market, to be honest, right? Because it makes us sleepy. So when we drink alcohol, we get tired, but the process that follows in the slipstream of having an alcohol intake is that it completely messes up your sleep, right? Alcohol contains a lot of calories, and when we drink it in the evening before we go to bed, we actually get tired, but it's a little bit like putting gas on a fire that we want to turn off. So the body starts to burn all of these calories, your blood pressure increases, again, your pulse level. I'm sure when you look at your Oura data, what you will see is also that your resting heart rate, not only your HRV is dropping down, but your resting heart rate goes up. And it's basically because you're asking your body to go like full spin, full power at a point in time where you actually want to go to sleep, the brain responds a little bit differently because it gets like sedated by the alcohol. That's why you feel tired. So alcohol is absolutely a no-go if you have sleeping problems, because it's not going to resolve the problem. It's going to make the problem worse. If I took you to a sleep lab and I would do measurements, and I would see how it affected your like overall sleep cycle. So when we sleep in a sleep cycle of 90 minutes, around 90 minutes. And during that sleep cycle, we go through different phases of sleep. And the very common question is someone saying, oh, I heard that deep sleep is the most important part. And just like to demystify, every sleep phase has an impact on you, and every sleep phase is important. And alcohol messes up basically every phase, if that makes sense. So if you see your data at the back of a night with alcohol, you will be reduced in the output on more or less everything, to be honest.
Okay, good to know. Napping.
The only place where the only place where you might see actually an increase is that it can make you fall asleep quicker if you have problems falling asleep, but it's not a solution.
No, and it's not gonna give you a good night's sleep. That's fundamental.
No.
What about napping? Because I have friends that somehow manage to nap everywhere and anywhere in any situation, whether it's noisy around them or not. They are absolutely fine with just falling asleep right then and there. I've never been able to do that.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?